Hello, Eddie. We're back.
Good afternoon, Àlex. It's wonderful to reconnect with you on the last phase of our journey in Volume 1. And last time you were observing how things happen to us in three groups. Well, we're going to finish Volume 1, the first of three. And just at the end, I want a minute, literally, just to summarize the whole essence of what I'm trying to get across by way of just a little, well, story or allegory, if you like. And then I will explain Volume 2. But now the stage is yours. You're on the center court.
Well, yes, this is the last chapter of Volume 1. It's remarkable. We've made it through. It feels like it happened really fast. And I must say, because I always speak for me and to you, but also for the audience that may be listening, that the chapter 9 is, to me, a pinnacle of Volume 1. Sometimes it's not like that. It's like going upwards and then maybe just cooling down. But there's so much material in chapter 1. I would say so much wisdom, not just material. And it's going to be just a disclaimer. It's not going to be possible, I think, to unpack it because you speak about so many traditions and the mystery teachings of so many traditions that there's just too much. And then underneath it or around it or within it is the question of who am I? So it cannot get deeper than that, I would suppose. And by the way, I was thinking we could devote many hours or many chapters, installments to chapter 9 because it's really rich. So let's see how we can manage to just how you can manage to convey some of the core ideas because there are many.
Yeah. The traditions are very rich, but the saving grace and the beauty of it is because they come from one well of wisdom. The water from that well is one water. But as it flows downstream, it collects different colors and, different shapes.
Yes.
So even if we talk of one tradition properly and then say one or two others, we're in a sense encapsulating all the traditions. And I just need to apologize to viewers. I'm sucking a throat castile because, like many people, British weather can cause a little bit of British flu, but I'm fine. But let me just start by saying chapter 9 does, of course, consider the mystery traditions on who am I. But I start that chapter in all sincerity by acknowledging not just the subtle bodies and the higher states of consciousness, but our physical body as well. And we owe every debt of gratitude to medical science. I mean, it is medical science that has shown us that we have 1,000,000 billion cells in our body, more than the stars in the Milky Way. And of that collection, 600 billion cells are dying every day, and the same amount are being regenerated, 10 million cells per second. Now, despite all of that, there is this marvelous orchestration. We are still one human being. So thank you, medical science, for pointing this out. And these figures I'm not just plucking out. That's from Ervin Laszlo's book, a top scientist. But that wonderful intelligence that orchestrates it is something we also need to think about.
This is the usual loving disclaimer of saying we're going to talk about this and that, and this is really valuable. But talking about this doesn't exclude that, and emphasizing that doesn't negate this. And we always need to do that, I realize.
Yeah.
Yes.
And to discover the mysteries of the physical body, we need physical instruments, X-ray and MRI and PET scans. But none of that will open the smallest window into our internal being. For that, we need elevated state of consciousness.
And at the same time, perhaps you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but even if we would just restrict ourselves to the physical plane, what's going on there, it's truly wonderful and amazing, right? So just physically or biologically entertaining what you just said, how our bodies function, our physical bodies function. It leaves us on, should leave any scientist and any lay person in awe. I mean, it's just wondrous, but there's more.
Much more, of course. Yeah.
I want to take your metaphor of the waters, because I'm a theoretician by training, and I love distilling principles, and your volumes are full of laws and principles. So it's really fascinating for a theoretician. But it's not just that, because if again go back to the metaphor of the waters, I still want to have a little tasting of this particular water and that particular water, or if this was wine, for instance, or if this was any other metaphor, right? So I'd like to get a little bit onto these mystery teachings of antiquity, and you speak about Egypt, of course, India, but for instance, some we hardly ever hear about, or I don't, like Persian ones, or later on when you speak about contemporary ones. And there were some pages in this book where I felt, and again, I'm speaking from my own perspective, absolute ignorant. Like I had never heard of that. And, because usually I read books, okay, this sounds familiar. I may have heard this, and maybe I don't know much about it, but I've heard some for many pages. I never heard of it. So I wonder, perhaps we could start with this. Why do you think so? It's incredible to me. I've never heard, especially when you were talking about the 19th century, total blank.
Oh, you mean the transcendentalism and the New Thought and
Emerson? And Emerson, yes.
Oh, and Ralph Waldo Trine and well, they've seemed to come out of the tributaries from the same well, in many ways. So. Entirely up to you, Àlex. Do you want to start with one or two of the ancient ones, the Greek, for example?
Yes. I'm asking for a tasting here, a tasting of some ancient ones and some contemporary ones.
Yes. Definitely. I mean, the North American, Central and South American are very, they're not that well known, but I think most listeners would relate to the Greek. I would have thought, and the Egyptians. So, or the Persian. Let's just start with the Greek. And in terms of who am I, the Greek mysteries, the Eleusinian mysteries, the lesser mysteries, and the greater mysteries, the Orphic and the Dionysian. If we just recall the story or the ritual of the Greek god Bacchus, who was torn to pieces by the giant Titans. And the Titans then scattered the body of the god Bacchus far and wide. And Jupiter, the father of Bacchus, beholding the crime, hurled his thunderbolt and reduced the bodies of the Titans, the giants, with fire. But this is the important point now. From the ashes of the Titans, which contained a portion of the Bacchic body which the Titans had partly devoured, from those ashes was created the human race, which shows then, in terms of this story, that the human being is part Titan, the irrational soul, and part godly, the Bacchic nature, because the ashes contained a part of the god that the Titans ate. So how did the giants capture the god Bacchus before devouring him? By getting him, the god, to become ensnared or mesmerized by his own shadow, his own face in a mirror. And that signifies engrossment in a sea of Maya, in a sea of illusion. So when we identify our total being just with our material principle, that causes problems and that causes trouble. So the Bacchic state in each person is the state of the rational soul in a state of self-knowledge. The Titanic state in each person is the irrational state, and we all know when our mind is scattered, how our judgment is impaired. So one of the greatest modern sages, Firoz Mehta, said, if you want proof of God and devil, it's very simple. Look at your own face in the mirror. You will see both.
Mm.
What varies is the proportion, of course.
Which speaks back.
And how fascinated people are with their self-image. When you go on holiday, you see these stupid little iPhones on totty, or what do you call them? Self-totting sticks. You know, they love to take a picture of themselves. We are fascinated with ourselves. So this story is not just a story. It really is an allegory of the human state.
And goes back, I was going to say, to this puzzling and beautiful dual nature of man. And I remind our listeners, we're using man in this sense, not to denote male versus female. So this dual nature, and which is in a way so literal when we see a person standing and has earth beneath and heaven and sky above. And so and also this journey, right? And I think it's a journey of unfolding consciousness, is just realizing that dual nature, and also noticing a direction and working consciously towards that fulfillment, isn't it?
Yes, definitely. Never castigating or ignoring the lower nature, because with that, we are useless on earth. We were great in heaven, but we're not in heaven yet. We're here. So it is acknowledging the lower nature, which, as Plato, I think, pointed out, the material body is a tomb in most people, but with the enlightened person, the sage, it is a temple.
Mention another of those, if you don't mind, these ancient mystery teachings, one that you think is not so heard of usually.
What about, the Persian one?
Yes.
The Mithras?
Yes.
Well, the old Mithras cult was entirely dualistic. That Mithras stands for the deity, the male principle, and Mithras represents the masculine principle, and Mithra represents the feminine principle. And it's this story that whenever God Ahura Mazda planted a good seed, Ahriman, the evil one, planted a malevolent seed, and so tried to disrupt the work of Ahura Mazda. But this dualistic cult was taken to much higher status by the great prophet Zarathustra, and in his teaching, it was entirely monotheistic, which is absolutely right, that out of the one come the dual principles of the good mind and the so-called evil mind. So the good mind, spentamenu, and the counteracting mind, angramenu, are the two principles eternally coming out of the one. So we can, in a general sort of way, relate this to the mind principle in general, that we have the lower mind and the higher mind, the good mind and the counteracting mind that likes to make a mess of all our good thoughts and our good resolutions. I think it's this word evil is a very unfortunate term to use. I think it's much better to think of the two as counteracting or so-called opposing principles. And therefore, we find man's nature, the human being's nature, to be dual in that sense, part good mind and part counteracting mind. So all great esoteric teachings have united in affirming there is no, and this goes back to what we were saying last time, there is no independent principle of evil, by whatever name you like to give it, Ahriman, devil, Satan, Mara, whatever. The Kabbalists define or refer to evil as the lining of the good. If you have a nice, beautiful coat and you have a coarse material, it's like the coarse lining of the good material. So, of course, there are evil conditions and evil people who would deny that, but evil exists in proportion to the diminishing of the good. So the more the good diminishes, the more it presents as evil. And I was only thinking this afternoon, as one thinks about these things all the time, of course, that one can, in a very general, loose way, related to the second law of thermodynamics, that if you leave your room just as it is, I will guarantee you it'll get untidy. You have to put energy to maintain the tidiness. So you have to put energy to maintain the good state, because left to itself, unless you are an absolute sage prophet, Mahatma, the propensity for untidiness, for evil, will slowly start to seep in. You have to work at always being good. So evil, in this sense, is the diminishment of the good.
This is very interesting, because we often hear about the hard problem of consciousness, but the hard problem of evil, it's, I would say, a harder problem.
It's much harder,
and it's a theological one, and it has been a theological one for centuries, right? And we don't tend to think about it, yet we encounter it in different degrees. And so what you're saying, it's so interesting, phrasing it as the diminishing of good, because it makes me think, and that's what I would ask you now, that in this case, these two principles are not symmetric, because one is defined in terms of the absence of the other.
Yes, it is the absence, rather than just the contrast.
Yes.
The decrease in, that's right. Yeah.
So this points to a kind of resolution, right? Otherwise, we'll be trapped in these opposing forces. And something that helps me think about that, I took it from when I was discussing the work of Ian McGilchrist with him, this idea of opposing and friction. And you need friction in order to be able to walk. So the resistance that the ground offers, it could be seen as something negative, but also it's what would help you move forward. So there's something of a paradox there, a deep one, I believe.
It is a paradox. And again, it's the primal issue is not good and evil, so-called, which are so overused, but it's one between light and darkness, between reality and unreality.
Yes. So timely in the times of virtual reality, and how to think about to think about those unrealities that look pretty real, actually. Yes,
they certainly look pretty real.
Yes. Well, that's the point, that they look pretty real. Okay, let's go back then. Again, I invite the reader, of course, to go and read, because just these ancient mystery teachings are so rich in chapter 9. Then there's another section which is more contemporary. Could you speak about Shambhala and also about Emerson?
Yes, Shambhala is one of these enigmatic terms. It's really a Sanskrit term. It's a place name for a highly mystical and esoteric location that's mentioned in the ancient Indian Puranas, and the Puranas go back, of course, centuries and centuries. And it is said to be the radiating center, so to speak, or the seat of the greatest brotherhood or unity of spiritual adepts and their emissaries on earth. And we may tentatively suggest that it is located in a little-known corner of northwest Tibet. But the recent researches or expedition of Nicholas Roerich in 1923 to 26, I believe, he wrote about events that indicated or seemed to indicate the real existence of Shambhala. But I think it's important not to try and fix it and objectify it. One can regard it as a spiritual nucleus, which probably did exist as a physical location on Earth centuries and aeons ago, but now it is more on another dimension, even though Shambhala has its radiating centers worldwide. And the other person you mentioned was Emerson, I think, wasn't it? Yes. A wonderful man. And oh gosh, I wish the Americans these days would read Emerson and Ralph Waldo Trine. There are many themes to Emerson's great writings, but they all come out of the transcendentalism movement, which then merged into New Thought. And the three influences on transcendentalism were, firstly, a reaction against severe biblical criticism and the skepticism of the English philosopher David Hume. Then they were very influenced by German and English Romanticism. And thirdly, they were influenced by the mystical spiritualism of Swedenborg and Indian sacred literature. And Swedenborg, as a matter of interest, traveled to England to hear Isaac Newton's lectures. So again, we see this wonderful coming together of great minds. I find that very inspiring. But it's then transcendentalism, New Thought, took that on, and its main tenets were that materialism, or the material realm we live on, is the realm of effects. The spiritual is the realm of cause. So the material is what we see. The spiritual is the causative influence, which is unseen, of course. And that sin, disease, and all of that are basically a consequence of incorrect thinking. And this movement is open to all religions, so very much in line with the Theosophical Society. So all of this influenced Emerson, of course. And his writings could be grouped in terms of pointing out the existence of the nature of the human soul, the relationship between the human soul and the divine, God, the relationship between other human souls as well, and really how this soul manifests in life. And he said quite openly, when we try to define God, however we try, he is beyond all definition because he includes all definitions, so to speak. And his great work, many great work, but his great work was the Oversoul. That's known as the Oversoul. And he tried to define it, but then he admitted you can't, because you only know the Oversoul through, as he said, through moral actions. So you can define it as that great matrix, that great mother principle, and all of that. But ultimately, you will know it through moral actions. So then he said the soul in man meaning, of course, men and women, is not an organ. It's not an organ, but it animates and it exercises all organs. So it's that behind all organs. It's not, what did he say? It's not light, but it stands behind what we see as light. It is not the intellect or will, but the master of intellect and will. And Emerson's thoughts are very much in line with the basic principles that came out through the Theosophical Society and the Anthroposophical Society and other great societies. And he revered Plato, he revered Swedenborg, the Bhagavad Gita, the Indian teachings. He put together the Eastern and the Western.
As you describe this, I realize quite often we come back, or I come back to asking similar questions, but it's kind of a cyclical process, hopefully of deepening. So these teachings in particular, but also in general, the transcendentalism and new thought and so on, they are, but not quite science. They are, but not quite philosophy. And they are, but not quite religion.
Yes. Yeah.
What a weird creature. What are they? What are they?
The center point of all of those three. And you can go along any radius.
Yes.
Center point. Yes. I would say if moral science or ethical science, if you like.
And you will need to explain in what sense, right? Because even the word moral or ethical.
The moral has...
it's very misused and abused, and yes.
Of course, yes. We don't mean morality in the finger-wagging, sense.
Yes. You also mention in the book, make reference to this spiritual vacuum. I suppose the tides of these centuries can also explain by these tectonic movements, right? Of religion going up and then certain scientific thought going up and vacuums are created. Can you describe a little bit what's going on underneath?
Well, underneath the tectonic plates?
Yes, throughout these centuries, because underneath these changes, which are the tectonic plates, and it's an impossible task to do briefly, but also to realize, and we've said this before, that not despite, but at the same time that we're talking about perennial wisdom and principles, they code in the zeitgeist. They are the boundary conditions are those of the times, right? And I think that at least this helps me when thinking about these movements, not just as, okay, so interesting, but why was it happening then? And then something else happened. And here we are today. And it's because these principles kind of embody the what's going on in every particular epoch.
Yeah. Well, eternal principles can never be held back by any vehicle, any form, or any person. And I think last time we spoke, I believe I mentioned that the ungrateful world thinks in its stupidity that by butchering or executing an emissary of truth, a great prophet, it can completely cut off the source of learning. We can never do that because truth is far greater than any of its emissaries, who have suffered terribly, of course, in their divinely appointed task. But what's going on? I think people need sometimes a simple book by someone who really knew what he was talking about, not just writing. And I mentioned Ralph Waldo Trine, In Tune with the Infinite. And he said he wanted to write this book that was going to be so simple that even a child would understand it. Well, actually, a child would, because, it's the innocence of the child that can understand deep truths. It's not us so-called grown-up adults full of our conditioning and mental furniture. But Ralph Waldo Trine said exactly what the great esoteric teaching talks about, the Sutratma thread, the golden thread that binds. And he said, Ralph Waldo Trine, that there's a golden thread that runs through every religion in the world. And the realm of the unseen is a realm of cause. The realm of the seen is a realm of effect. Now, the interesting point here is that Ralph Waldo Trine's book was read by Napoleon Hill, the motivation guru, by Queen Victoria, and by Henry Ford. And it is very interesting that Henry Ford attributes so much of his success to having read In Tune with the Infinite. And the point is that it is significant that the great industrialist Henry Ford would pay attention to a spiritual book, and essentially a spiritually inclined person, Ralph Waldo Trine, would equally acknowledge the value of the material principle. So getting those two in balance is really what I see as man's salvation. Yes. So what's going on now is a lot of turbulence because people are mesmerized by technology. But underneath, there is this golden thread, and you see more evidence of it through the scientific and medical network, the wonderful work that David Lorimer is doing in bringing people together, completely incredible work, and other great societies, the World Goodwill. There is this golden thread that is beginning to become visible. It's always there, but we're beginning to see it becoming visible.
There's another aspect that transpires often in the chapters, which I would describe as a kind of you being just in pointing to the caveats of technology, but at the same time, you point to the caveats of this kind of spiritualist traditions by saying, well, it's not because you're into that you're immediately virtuous. It's more the other way around. You work towards these virtues, and then you may want to call yourself spiritual.
Exactly, yeah. And exactly, just taking on what you said, people say, oh, well, how can I be clairvoyant? And, really? Well, one of the wonderful friends I knew for many, many years in the Theosophical Society was Lester Smith, a fellow of the Royal Society. And he wrote 3 wonderful books. And he said that if you want to develop your clairvoyance sensibly, you just work on your normal senses, purify your normal senses, increase your powers of observation, make sure that what you're seeing is not conditioned by all the other things going around. So just as you were saying, you don't become virtuous by being spiritual. You start by being virtuous and then you become spiritual.
Yes. And now that you mentioned perception, in the same way that you were alluding to the marvelous body made of cells and how incredible it is, well, even ordinary perception is pretty incredible if you stop for a moment and contemplate what's going on. It's pretty mysterious. It's not to take for granted.
Oh, it is absolutely a miracle.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I've mentioned this to you in our conversations, that whenever people knock medical science and say, oh, well, it's a load of rubbish, homeopathy and acupuncture, I say, look, wait a minute. It is medical science that saved my eyesight when I was 14 years old in both my eyes. So how dare you knock medical science? Give each one its due.
Yes.
It is an absolute miracle. And the work you are doing, Àlex, with extra-auricular vision, which seems to allude to a higher faculty, to a latent power in mankind that hopefully will flower in the fullness of time.
Yeah, again, recognized by many traditions. So nothing new here. Perhaps the only novelty is that we can try to look at it through current scientific lenses. Yes,
Yeah, yeah.
yes. Now, again, there's so much in chapter 9, but towards the end, I think it's the last quote. It really
Mm-hmm.
surprised me because it says something really beautiful. It speaks about to live well, to live well. And it reminds me of one of these other quotes by Alfred North Whitehead that he says
Yeah.
to live well, to live better. But in this quote, I don't remember now, but it's the last one of chapter 9, I think. It says live well, but it also says to die well and to be born well. Wow.
Did I say that?
It's a quote. I can go. I have here the book. I can tell you.
Never mind.
No, let's.
I would say if you live well, you will die well, and you have a damn good chance of being born well.
Let me read it, because since I mentioned it. Okay, so it's page 310.
Right.
It's a quote by The Secret Teachings of All Ages, right? And so
Manly Halls, yes.
The criers of the mysteries speak again.
Absolutely, yes.
Bidding all men welcome to the house of light. In this era of practical things, men ridicule even the existence of God. They scoff at goodness while they ponder with befolded minds at the phantasmagoria of materiality. The great institution of materiality has failed. Only transcendental philosophy knows the path. Only the illuminated reason can carry the understanding part of man upward to the light. And now it comes this sentence. Only philosophy can teach man to be born well. That really surprised me. Teach man to be born well, to live well, to die well.
Yes.
And in perfect measure, be born again.
Yes. Well, that in a sense is alluding to karma, isn't it? That if you live well, that your after-death states will be an inside-out experience of how you lived your life, and that will attract the right sort of karma for your next incarnation, even though a lot of that karma could be a tremendous amount of suffering to get rid of what needs to be worked through.
And the quote ends by saying, to that, we invite you. Invite you.
Yeah. You, everyone, and you in capitals, yes.
Yes. Yeah. But I also love the word invite. It's not we persuade, we argue for, we compel you, we invite you.
It's an invitation, yes.
Yes. All right.
And part of the mystery teaching, of course, are the severest tests of the character of the initiate.
Yeah. No joke, eh? No joke.
No, it's no joke at all. And it has to be taken very seriously, because the finest chapter on that is by Paul Brunton, A Night in the Great Pyramid, where in 3 pages you see what tests are placed on the path of the disciples. So one is given every opportunity to turn back and just live your own ordinary life. Because once you've made that decision, there's no turning back. So there's that beautiful saying now by Blavatsky in The Secret Doctrine, that once you have invited the divine light to be your witness, it will search out every dark corner in your being. And no longer can you say, oh, sorry, I want to go back. Excuse me. No, there's no excuse me, sorry. Because you have invited that divine light. No one forced you. You were given every chance to go your own way, follow the crowd, go to the pub, get drunk. But you made the choice. You asked for the divine witness. And it will not only search out your dark corners, it will illuminate your bright corners equally.
Yes. Yeah, Mira Alfasa, right? The partner of Sri Aurobindo, the spiritual partner, used to speak about this light, but this light purifies, and purification also goes through via burning and heating up. It's not just a light of comfortably sunbathing, right? No. It's purification. All right. Well, again, so much more in chapter 9. Now, if we move to the recapitulation to start wrapping it up, I wanted to point attention to something, and then perhaps you could do your summary as you suggested at the beginning.
Yeah, sure.
I I really appreciate this concept that all start with C, the connection amongst what you've been explaining, the convergence. And there's another one that you emphasize in this recapitulation, which is consilience.
Yes, the two are very important, and both are highly significant and important. So, convergence really is coming from the mainstream scientific standpoint that we don't know everything about everything, but we know enough about many things. So there is a convergence of an opinion towards a stated position. So, for example, Steven Weinberg gives the example in Dreams of a Final Theory that if someone said there are 7 golden temples in a city of Texas, well, you would say that centuries ago, when the invaders walked into America, you would think, well, perhaps there is a legend about 7 golden temples. But now we know enough about the topology and the geography. So would you mount an expedition in the spirit of open-mindedness? Would you mount an expedition to search every corner of Texas from the Red River to the Rio Grande in search of golden temples? No, you wouldn't. So he argues, therefore, we know enough about science that subjects like astrology, telepathy, psychokinesis, we know not enough about science that we are converging to a stated position where all of those things are superstitious. Right, consilience is another form of convergence. That is saying that it is a convergence of independent or semi-independent bits of information that are weak in themselves, but when put together, will build up a very strong body of evidence. So if there is a little bit of evidence from a child in Persia who remembered former incarnation, that's a bit of weak evidence. But then when you get another bit of evidence from a child in India and hundreds of others, I'm thinking of even Stevenson's work, all of those individual weak bits of evidence converge to a very strong body of evidence that indicates that reincarnation is certainly not a figment of the imagination. So that is consilience.
Beautifully explained, very clear. Yes, I've heard this once in the form of a metaphor, talking about arrows or sticks that you can break. If they give you one stick, you can break it. If they give you another one, you can break it. They're weak in that sense. But if you put 10 together, well, then you cannot break them. So,
Àlex, that was one of my favorite Aesop's fable stories that my parents would impress on me. You know, the brothers who were fighting amongst each other, and father says, break the stick, break it. Put 2 sticks, break it. Put 10 sticks, can you break it? So if you brothers stay together, you will not be broken.
Okay, so now I know where it comes from. I know the source now.
Aesop's fables, yeah.
Yes.
One of my favorite stories that my parents impressed on me.
And so connection.
Where do you get in life? By fighting with people.
Well, that's why we were talking about friction and these principles and evil. I mean, it seems like conflict is inevitable. Another thing is, what do we do with it? And if it becomes war, or if conflict becomes an opportunity to grow or realize further.
But friction isn't conflict. No. Even though we use the word.
Yes.
Anyway, friction creates sparks. We need sparks to light a fire.
Yes. And just one last comment about this last chapter, recapitulation. You end with a quote, I think it's Schrödinger, about is it Schrödinger, the blood transfusion image.
Yeah.
And it's quite properly chosen, I may say, because I feel, after having gone through volume 1, when one does so, that there's some new blood running through. And let me share one thing. It's personal, but I had the medical problem, and I lost a lot of blood. I lost more than 4 liters, not at the same time. Otherwise, I would have been sucked out of blood. So I'm back to the honoring medical science, right? Mm-hmm. I actually I thought about it. I got all my blood replaced from other people's blood, and yes, intellectually and spiritually. Reading volume 1 is already a blood transfusion in this other sense.
Thank you. Well, that's very eloquently put, Àlex. So appreciate that. But Schrödinger was saying that we don't throw overboard the wonderful benefits of science, but we need blood transfusion from the East. So we marry the quantitative precision of science with the holistic and the other approaches of Eastern wisdom, but you don't need that blood transfusion so fast that you get clots.
Yes. These are subtleties on the metaphor. Let me add one more, because you made me think of something I reread recently. Mm-hmm. So I'm a great admirer of Henry Bergson. I probably have said that already. And apart from his books, Creative Evolution and Matter and Memory and Time and Free Will and the Two Sources of Morality and Religion, all worth reading. He has these lectures, a series of lectures compiled in a book. I think it's called in English Creative Energy, but it depends. Different languages have different books for the compilation. Mm-hmm. And in one of them, there's a lecture he gave when he was made president of the Society, bless you, when he was made president of the Society for Psychical Research. Mm-hmm. And, well, it's, as always, fascinatingly well written. He got the Nobel Prize in Literature, but also the insight. And he speaks about the job that the parapsychological community does and how hard it is, and how, in a way, they are demanded to show the certainties and the measurements that the hard sciences have mastered, and of course how difficult that task is. But then Bergson makes a comment towards the end, which is, I felt it very integrative, very healing. It wasn't just, oh, this is good, this is bad, poor you, oh, how dogmatic. He said something like, well, if we imagine that the history had started from the other side, if we imagine that the sciences had started, the sciences as we know them, I mean, Galileo and so on, had started with spirit and had progressively gone down to, mind and life and matter. He said, perhaps we would not have the precision that we have, having started first with mathematics and the Greeks, and then physics in 400 years ago, and so on, building upwards. And now that we have this tremendous accuracy and precision, now let's use this logic, but something else, to study spirit and mind. And I found this very moving, because it's a way of saying, well, let's just celebrate how things have gone and go beyond, rather than, again, make it kind of a battle between blue team and red team.
I couldn't agree more with you, Àlex. That's very, very eloquently put. Blue team and red team, yes. Let us celebrate the triumph of science, and that's one of Bernard Carr's favorite terms. Definitely the triumph of science, but let's now celebrate it and use the methodology of science to go beyond, without throwing anything overboard, without any blood clots. Yeah.
So he's saying also, let me say one more thing. He's saying perhaps, I mean, I'm here glossing what I understand, but he's saying perhaps that's the safest path. It's amazing. It's like, it's good. And then he's a master of metaphors, of course. Actually, Bergson said that the talent of the writer is that he or she makes you forget that they are using words. This is a fascinating idea.
Oh, lovely.
So he uses this metaphor of a ship coming through the fog. And he said, if we had started from spirit down to matter, it could be like these people are on an island and they see a ship coming and they've never seen a ship, and they would not know what to make of it. It's like, it would be knowing all they know about spirit. They could not figure out that that's actually a ship coming. And that image also makes you understand, wow. So yes, thank you for having nailed down, and there's still more work to do. This is never a closed story. Science never ends, but for having nailed down the physical world, understood quite a lot, of course, not closure ever, of the biological world, and then more on the psychological world and beyond.
I wish Bergson's, Schrodinger's, and all the other great thoughts and philosophers were more part of mainstream scientific reading. It would leaven, it would balance this exclusive obsession with going in one direction. Starting with spirit, the ancients, they did in a sense, but then it got turned into a superstition, and then, it became a religion with a small r. And then that's when it lost the plot, so to speak. And that's when we needed science to introduce rigor and critical thinking.
Yeah, the story of the human race is an incredible adventure, right? It's the best novel ever.
The book of life is the greatest book, isn't
it? Yes.
Yeah.
So would you like to conclude with that summary?
Yeah, sure. Yes, I just thought of an image that would try and encapsulate what I've tried to get across in volume 1, certainly, and all of them. I go running around my local lake every day, and it's not my lake, of course. It's a fishing lake, but it's 5 minutes away, which is wonderful, whatever the weather. And there's a lovely playground there, and I love to watch the little children on the playground before they grow up and start doing all of that with their mobile phones, and you can see just pure joy, pure fun, no conditioning, no strings attached. Now, suppose a little child comes down a slide and bangs its mouth and knocks a tooth out. Now, what will you do? You call the slide manufacturer. The slide manufacturer will find out that the slope was too steep. So from his point of view, it's a physics problem. It's the pure transformation of potential energy to kinetic energy. It can be a child, say the child weighs 15 stone. It can be a stone weighing 15 stone. It can be a piece of wood. He is interested in how fast this thing comes down the slope, neglecting friction and air friction and all of that. So physics problem from a height to kinetic energy. Now, suppose the child knocked a tooth out and goes to the dentist. Now, is the dentist going to say, what was your weight? The weight means a lot to the slide manufacturer. If the child were 100 pounds, well, it's not a child. It means a lot coming down the slide, structure of the slide. The dentist is only interested in the tooth as an object. It's an object. The dentist isn't going to say, what's your weight? Even though as a compassionate dentist, he's treating the child as a human being, but for his job, it is an object. Now, say the child then has nightmares when she grows up to be a beautiful young lady and goes to a psychiatrist and has nightmares about that terrible incident in her childhood. Is the psychiatrist going to treat the lady as an object? Is the psychiatrist going to say, how much do you weigh? No. He's going to be interested in the inner being, in the soul nature. So the point I'm trying to make is that the physics problem was absolutely right in the context of physics, mass coming down a slope. But when you mix categories and try and use physics to understand the mind, you just talk nonsense. So if you're thinking of kinetic energy of neurons, you're just going to talk nonsense. So the psychiatrist is going to think of Carl Jung, the homecoming of the soul, homesickness of the soul, which has caused these problems. So that's just a very simplistic example of what I'm trying to say all the time. Ask the right questions. For the spiritual realm, the laws of the spirit. For the material realm, the laws of the material.
I love the image. Yes. And the mother and the father would care about the emotional well-being at that very moment, right? When the kid falls, and just embrace that what's going on. Yes. It also looks like some sort of chiropraxis that you're practicing here, because at the end of the day, it's just to put things in their proper place. Like, to Caesar's what's Caesar's, right? To physics what's physics, to biology to what's biology, and to spirit what's spirit.
And when you're crossing bridges, you're using two languages, so be careful.
And that reminds me, since you mentioned Bernard Card, I had the chance to meet him, and we were discussing, and in his latest presentations, when he speaks about these three worlds and how you cross them, he pointed out the irony that, because you mentioned bridges, that when you're trying to bridge from one to the other, the ones at the other side of the shore usually don't welcome you so much. But it's the same thing if you bridge from the other shore to the first one. There's something about the crossing bridges that it's an adventure.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Well, volume 1, do you want to say something about, we'll say lots, but something about what's coming?
On volume 2, we've explored the benefits and the limitations of science in terms of the total human being, the human body. We talked about the mystery teachings. We're now going to look through our microscope into the human being before we look through the telescope at the wider picture. And it's very important to distinguish between man, small n, and man, capital N. So we're going to see that man, capital M, is really an evolving divine spark that is embodied in this physical flesh that we call the human being. So human, the origin of the word is like humus of the earth. But we are not just of the earth. We are more than the earth. We are that evolving divine spark that has taken on this earthly body. So the subtle bodies are very much part of the occult doctrine. And what we're going to have to decide on, Àlex, is how many Sanskrit terms we can use. But not just use terms for the sake of terms, explain why they're so meaningful, in the sense that, if you're a musician, you use Italian words or German words. So there has to be just a few Sanskrit words. But when you unpack the meaning behind them, they really light up what they're trying to get at. So that would be another wonderful adventure. And I really, really look forward to it hugely, with great excitement.
So am I. Thank you very much, Edi.